Okay, I think with that, it's time to start reading today. Let me adjust this sound a little bit. And we should be good to go. So, it's nice to be back, and today we'll be starting the second part of the sequences, the sequence on fake beliefs by Eliezer Yudkowsky. An account of irrationality would be incomplete if it provided no theory about how rationality works, or if its theory consisted only of vague truisms with no precise explanatory mechanism. This sequence asks why it's useful to base one's behavior on rational expectations and what it feels like to do so. Without further ado, let's start. Making Beliefs Pay Rent in Anticipated Experiences by Eliezer Yudkowsky. Thus begins the ancient parable. If a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound? One says, yes it does, for it makes vibrations in the air. Another says, no it does not, for there is no auditory processing in any brain. If there's a foundational skill in the martial art of rationality, a mental stance on which all other technique rests, it might be this one. The ability to spot, inside your own head, psychological signs that you have a mental map of something, and signs that you don't. Suppose that, after a tree falls, the two arguers walk into the forest together. Will one expect to see the tree fallen to the right, and the other expect to see the tree fallen to the left? Suppose that, before the tree falls, the two leave a sound recorder next to the tree. Would one, playing back the recorder, expect to hear something different from the other? Suppose they attach an electroencephalograph to any brain in the world. Would one expect to see a different trace than the other? Though the two argue, one saying no and the other saying yes, they do not anticipate any different experiences. The two think they have different models of the world, but they have no difference with respect to what they expect will happen to them. Their maps of the world do not diverge in any sensory detail. It's tempting to try to eliminate this mistake class by insisting that the only legitimate kind of belief is an anticipation of sensory experience. But the world does, in fact, contain much that is not sensed directly. We don't see the atoms underlying the brick, but the atoms are in fact there. There is the floor beneath your feet, but you don't experience the floor directly. You see the light reflected from the floor, or rather, you see what your retina and visual cortex have processed of that light. To infer the floor from seeing the floor is to step back into the unseen causes of experience. It may seem like a very short and direct step, but it is still a step. You stand on top of a tall building, next to a grandfather clock with an hour, minute, and ticking second hand. In your hand is a bowling ball and you drop it off the roof. On which tick of the clock will you hear the crash of the bowling ball hitting the ground. To answer precisely, you must use beliefs like Earth's gravity is 9.8 meters per second, and this building is around 120 meters tall. These beliefs are not wordless anticipations of a sensory experience, they are verbal-ish, propositional. It probably does not exaggerate much to describe these two beliefs as sentences made out of words. But these two beliefs have an inferential consequence that is a direct sensory anticipation. If the clock's second hand is on the 12 numeral when you drop the ball, you anticipate seeing it on the 1 numeral when you hear the crash 5 seconds later. To anticipate sensory experiences as precisely as possible, we must process beliefs that are not anticipations of sensory experience. It is a great strength of Homo sapiens that we can, better than any other species in the world, learn to model the unseen. It is also one of our great weak points. Humans often believe in things that are not only unseen, but unreal. The same brain that builds a network of inferred causes behind sensory experience can also build a network of causes that is not connected to sensory experience, or poorly connected. Alchemists believed that phlogiston caused fire. We could simplistically model their minds by drawing a little node labeled phlogiston, and an arrow from this node to their sensory experience of a crackling campfire. But this belief yielded no advanced predictions. The link from phlogiston to experience was always configured after the experience, rather than constraining the experience in advance. Or, suppose your English professor teaches you that the famous writer Wilkie Wilkinson is actually a retropositional author, which you can tell because his books exhibit alienated resublimation. And perhaps your professor knows all this because their professor told them. But all they are able to say about resublimation is that it's characteristic of retropositional thought, and of retropositionality that it's marked by alienated resublimation. What does this mean you should expect from Wilkie Wilkinson's books? Nothing. The belief, if you can call it that, doesn't connect to sensory experience at all. But you had better remember the propositional assertions that Wilkie Wilkinson has the retropositionality attribute and also the alienated resublimation attribute, so you can regurgitate them on the upcoming quiz. The two beliefs are connected to each other, though still not connected to any anticipated experience. We can build up whole networks of beliefs that are connected only to each other. Call these floating beliefs. It is a uniquely human flaw among animal species, a perversion of Homo sapiens' ability to build more general and flexible belief networks. The rationalist virtue of empiricism consists of constantly asking which experiences our beliefs predict, or better yet, prohibit. Do you believe that phlogiston is the cause of fire? Then what do you expect to see happen because of that? Do you believe that Wilkie Wilkinson is a retropositional author? Then what do you expect to see because of that? No, not alienated resublimation. What experience will happen to you? Do you believe that if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, it still makes a sound? Then what experience must therefore befall you? It is even better to ask, what experience must not happen to you? Do you believe that Elan Vital explains the mysterious aliveness of living beings? Then what does this belief not allow to happen? What would definitely falsify this belief? A null answer means that your belief does not constrain experience, it permits anything to happen to you. It floats. When you argue a seemingly factual question, always keep in mind which difference of anticipation you're arguing about. If you can't find the difference of anticipation, you're probably arguing about labels in your belief network, or even worse, floating beliefs, barnacles on your network. If you don't know what experiences are implied by Wilkie Wilkinson's writing being retropositional, you can go on arguing forever. Above all, don't ask what to believe, ask what to anticipate. Every question of belief should flow from a question of anticipation, and that question of anticipation should be the center of the inquiry. Every guess of belief should begin by flowing to a specific guess of anticipation, and should continue to pay rent in future anticipations. If a belief turns deadbeat, evict it. A Fable of Science and Politics by Eliezer Yudkowsky. In the time of the Roman Empire, civic life was divided between the blue and green factions. The blues and the greens murdered each other in single combats, in ambushes, in group battles, in riots. Procopius said of the warring factions, "So there grows up in them against their fellow man a hostility which has no cause, and at no time does it cease or disappear, for it gives place neither to the ties of marriage, nor of relationship, nor of friendship, and the case is the same even those who differ with respect to these colours be brothers or any other kin." Edward Gibbon wrote, "The support of a faction became necessary to every candidate for civil or ecclesiastical honours." Who were the blues and the greens? They were sports fans, the partisans of the blue and green chariot racing teams. Imagine a future society that flees into a vast underground network of caverns and seals the entrances. We shall not specify whether they flee disease, war, or radiation. We shall suppose the first undergrounders manage to grow food, find water, recycle air, make light, and survive, and that their descendants thrive and eventually form cities. Of the world above, there are only legends written on scraps of paper, and one of these scraps of paper describes the sky, a vast open space of air above a great unbounded floor. The sky is cerulean in color and contains strange floating objects like enormous tuft of white cotton. But the meaning of the word cerulean is controversial. Some say that it refers to the colour known as blue, and others that it refers to the colour known as green. In the early days of the underground society, the blues and greens contested with open violence. But today, truce prevails, a peace born of a growing sense of pointlessness. Cultural mores have changed. There is a large and prosperous middle class that has grown up with effective law enforcement and become unaccustomed to violence. The schools provide some sense of historical perspective, how long the battle between blues and greens continued, how many died, how little changed as a result. Minds have been laid open to the strange new philosophy that people are people, whether they be blue or green. The conflict has not vanished. Society is still divided along blue and green lines, and there is a blue and a green position on almost every contemporary issue, political or cultural importance. The blues advocate taxes on individual incomes, the greens advocate taxes on merchant sales. The blues advocate stricter marriage laws, while the greens wish to make it easier to obtain divorces. The blues take their support from the heart of city areas, while the more distant farmers and water sellers tend to be green. The blues believe that the Earth is a huge spherical rock at the center of the universe. The greens that it is a huge flat rock circling some other object called the sun. Not every blue or every green citizen takes the blue or green position on every issue, but it would be rare to find a city merchant who believed the sky was blue, and yet advocated an individual tax and freer marriage laws. The underground is still polarized, an uneasy piece. A few folk genuinely think that blues and greens should be friends, and it is now common for a green to patronize a blue shop or for a blue to visit a green tavern. Yet from a truce originally born of exhaustion, there is a quietly growing spirit of tolerance, even friendship. One day, the underground is shaken by a minor earthquake. A sightseeing party of 6 is caught in the trembler while looking at the ruins of ancient dwellings in the upper caverns. They feel the brief movement of the rock under their feet, and one of the tourists trips and scrapes her knee. The party decides to turn back, fearing further earthquakes. On their way back, one person catches a whiff of something strange in the air, a scent coming from a long, unused passageway. Ignoring the well-meant cautions of fellow travelers, the person borrows a powered lantern and walks into the passageway. The stone corridor wends upward, and finally terminates in a hole carved out of the world, a place where all stone ends. Distance. Endless distance stretches away into forever, a gathering space to hold 1,000 cities. Unimaginably far above, too bright to look at directly, a searing spark casts light over all visible space, the naked filament of some huge light bulb. In the air, hanging unsupported, are great incomprehensible tufts of white cotton, and the vast glowing ceiling above. The color is... Now, history branches, depending on which member of the sightseeing party decided to follow the corridor to the surface. Aditya the Blue stood under the blue forever and slowly smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. There was hatred and wounded pride. It recalled every argument she had ever had with the green, every rivalry, every contested promotion. You were right all along. The sky whispered down at her, and now you can prove it. For a moment, Aditya stood there, absorbing the message, glorying in it, and then she turned back to the stone corridor to tell the world. As Aditya walked, she curled her hand into a clenched fist. The truce, she said, is over. Baron the Green stared uncomprehendingly at the chaos of colours for long seconds. Understanding, when it came, drove a pile-driver punch into the pit of his stomach. Tears started from his eyes. Baron thought of the massacre of Cathay, where a blue army had massacred every citizen of a green town, including children. He thought of the ancient blue general, Anazrel, who had declared Greens a pit of disease, a pestilence to be cleansed. He thought of the glints of hatred he had seen in blue eyes, and something inside him cracked. How can you be on their side? Baron screamed at the sky, and then he began to weep, because he knew, standing under the malevolent blue glare, that the universe had always been a place of evil. Charles the Blue considered the blue ceiling, taken aback. As a professor in a mixed college, Charles had carefully emphasized that blue and green viewpoints are equally valid and deserving of tolerance. The sky was a metaphorical construct. The sky was a metaphysical construct, and cerulean the color that could be seen in more than one way. Briefly, Charles wondered whether a green standing in this place might not see a green ceiling above, or if perhaps the ceiling would be green this time tomorrow, but he couldn't stake the continued survival of civilization on that. This was merely a natural phenomenon of some kind, having nothing to do with moral philosophy or society, but one that might be readily misinterpreted, Charles feared. Charles sighed and turned to go back into the corridor. Tomorrow he would come back alone and block off the passageway. Daria, once green, tried to breathe amid the ashes of her world. I will not flinch, Daria told herself. I will not look away. She had been green all her life, and now she must be blue. Her friends, her family would turn from her. Speak the truth, even if your voice trembles, her father had told her. But her father was dead now, and her mother would never understand. Daria stared down the calm blue gaze of the sky, trying to accept it, and finally her breathing quietened. I was wrong, she said to herself mournfully. It's not so complicated after all. She would find new friends, and perhaps her family would forgive her, or, she wondered with a tinge of hope, rise to this same test, standing underneath this same sky. The sky is blue, Daria said experimentally, and nothing dire happened to her, but she couldn't bring herself to smile. Daria the Blue exhaled sadly and went back into the world, wondering what she would say. Eden, a green, looked up at the blue sky and began to laugh cynically. The course of his world's history came clear at last. Even he couldn't believe they had been such fools. Stupid, Eden said. Stupid, stupid, and all the time it was right here. Hatred, murders, wars, and all along it was just a thing somewhere that someone had written about like they'd write about any other thing. No poetry, no beauty, nothing that an insane person would ever care about. Just one pointless thing that had been blown out of all proportion. Eden leaned against the cave mouth wearily, trying to think of a way to prevent this information from blowing up the world, and wondering if they didn't all deserve it. Ferris gasped involuntarily, frozen by sheer wonder and delight. Ferris's eyes darted hungrily about, fastening on each side in turn, before moving reluctantly to the next. The blue sky, the white cloud, the vast unknown outside, full of places and things and people that no undergrounder had ever seen. Oh, so that's what color it is, Ferris said, and went exploring. Belief in Beliefs by Eliezer Yudkowsky. Carl Sagan once told a parable of someone who comes to us and claims, "There is a dragon in my garage." Fascinating. We reply that if we wish to see this dragon, let us set out at once for the garage. But wait, the claimant says to us, it is an invisible dragon. Now, Sagan points out this doesn't make the hypothesis unfalsifiable. Perhaps we go to the claimant's garage, and although we see no dragon, we hear heavy breathing from no visible source, footprints mysteriously appear on the ground, and instruments show that something in the garage is consuming oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide. But now suppose that we say to the claimant, okay, we'll visit the garage and see if we can hear heavy breathing. And the claimant quickly says, no, it's an inaudible dragon. We propose to measure carbon dioxide in the air, and the claimant says the dragon doesn't breathe. We propose to toss a bag of flour into the air to see if it outlines an invisible dragon, and the claimant immediately says the dragon is permeable to flour. Carl Sagan used this parable to illustrate the classic moral that poor hypotheses need to do fast footwork to avoid falsification. But I tell this parable to make a different point. The claimant must have an accurate model of the situation somewhere in their mind, because they can anticipate in advance exactly which experimental results they'll need to excuse. Some philosophers have been much confused by such scenarios, asking, does the claimant really believe there's a dragon present, or not? As if the human brain only had enough disk space to represent one belief at a time. Real minds are more tangled than that. There are different types of beliefs. Not all beliefs are direct anticipations. The claimant clearly does not anticipate seeing anything unusual upon opening the garage door. Otherwise, they wouldn't make advanced excuses. It may also be that the claimant's pool of propositional beliefs contains the free-floating statement, there is a dragon in my garage. It may seem to a rationalist that these two beliefs should collide and conflict, even though they are of different types. Yet, it is a physical fact that you can write "the sky is green" next to a picture of a blue sky without the paper bursting into flames. The rationalist virtue of empiricism is supposed to prevent us from making this class of mistake. We are supposed to constantly ask our beliefs which experiences they predict, make them pay rent in anticipation. But the dragon claimant's problem runs deeper, and cannot be cured with such simple advice. It's not exactly difficult to connect belief in a dragon to anticipated experience of the garage. If you believe there's a dragon in your garage, then you can expect to open up the door and see a dragon. If you don't see a dragon, then that means there's no dragon in your garage. This is pretty straightforward. You can even try it with your own garage. No, this invisibility business is a symptom of something much worse. Depending on how your childhood went, you may remember a time period when you first began to doubt Santa Claus's existence, but you still believed that you were supposed to believe in Santa Claus, so you tried to deny the doubts. As Daniel Dennett observes, where it is difficult to believe a thing, it is often much easier to believe that you ought to believe it. What does it mean to believe that the ultimate cosmic sky is both perfectly blue and perfectly green? The statement is confusing. It's not even clear what it would mean to believe it. What exactly would be believed if you believed? You can much more easily believe that it is proper, that it is good and virtuous and beneficial to believe that the ultimate cosmic sky is both perfectly blue and perfectly green. Dennett calls this belief in belief. And here things become complicated, as human minds are wont to do. I think even Dennett oversimplifies how this psychology works in practice. For one thing, if you believe in belief, you cannot admit to yourself that you merely believe in belief. What's virtuous is to believe, not to believe in believing, and so if you only believe in belief instead of believing, you are not virtuous. Nobody will admit to themselves, I don't believe the ultimate cosmic sky is blue and green, but I believe I ought to believe it, not unless they are unusually capable of acknowledging their own lack of virtue. People don't believe in belief, they just believe in belief. Those who find this confusing may find it helpful to study mathematical logic, which trains one to make a very sharp distinction between the proposition P, a proof of P, and a proof that P is provable. There are similarly sharp distinctions between P, wanting P, believing P, wanting to believe P, and believing that you believe P. There are different kinds of belief in belief. You may believe in belief explicitly, you may recite in your deliberate stream of consciousness the verbal sentence, it is virtuous to believe that the ultimate cosmic sky is perfectly blue and perfectly green, while also believing that you believe this unless you are unusually capable of acknowledging your own lack of virtue. But there are also less explicit forms of belief in belief. Maybe the dragon claimant fears the public ridicule that they imagine will result if they publicly confess that they were wrong. Maybe the dragon claimant flinches away from their prospect of admitting to themselves that there is no dragon, because it conflicts with their self-image as the glorious discoverer of the dragon who saw in their garage what all others had failed to see. If all our thoughts were deliberate verbal sentences like philosophers manipulate, the human mind would be a great deal easier for humans to understand. Fleeting mental images, unspoken flinches, desires acted upon without acknowledgement, these account for as much of ourselves as words. While I disagree with Dennett on some details and complications, I still think that Dennett's notion of belief in belief is the key insight necessary to understand the dragon claimant. But we need a wider concept of belief, not limited to verbal sentences. Belief should include unspoken anticipation controllers. Belief in belief should include unspoken cognitive behavior guiders. It is not psychologically realistic to say the dragon claimant does not believe there is a dragon in their garage, they believe it is beneficial to believe there is a dragon in their garage. But it is realistic to say the dragon claimant anticipates as if there is no dragon in their garage and makes excuses as if they believed in the belief. You can possess an ordinary mental picture of your garage with no dragons in it, which correctly predicts your experiences on opening the door, and never once think the verbal phrase, there is no dragon in my garage. I even bet it's happened to you, that when you open your garage door or bedroom door or whatever and expect to see 0 dragons, no such verbal phrase runs through your mind. And to flinch away from giving up your belief in the dragon, or flinch away from giving up your self-image as a person who believes in the dragon, it is not necessary to explicitly think, I want to believe there's a dragon in my garage. It is only necessary to flinch away from the prospect of admitting you don't believe. If someone believes in their belief in the dragon, and also believes in the dragon, the problem is much less severe. They will be willing to stick their neck out on experimental predictions, and perhaps even agree to give up the belief if the experimental prediction is wrong. But when someone makes up excuses in advance, it would seem to require that belief and belief in belief have become unsynchronized. Religions claim to be non-disprovable, by Eliezer Yudkowsky. The earliest account I know of a scientific experiment is, ironically, the story of Elijah and the priests of Baal. The people of Israel are wavering between Jehovah and Baal, so Elijah announces that he will conduct an experiment to settle it, quite a novel concept in those days. The priests of Baal will place their bull on an altar, and Elijah will place Jehovah's bull on an altar, but neither will be allowed to start the fire. Whichever god is real will call down fire on his sacrifice. The priests of Baal serve as control group for Elijah. The same wooden fuel, same bull, and the same priests making invocations, but to a false god. Then Elijah pours water on his altar, ruining the experimental symmetry, but this was back in the early days, to signify deliberate acceptance of the burden of proof, like needing a 0.05 significance level. The fire comes down on Elijah's altar, which is the experimental observation. The watching people of Israel shout, "The Lord is God," peer review. And then the people haul the 450 priests of Baal down to the river Kishon and slit their throats. This is stern, but necessary. You must firmly discard the falsified hypothesis, and do so swiftly, before it can generate excuses to protect itself. If the priests of Baal are allowed to survive, they will start babbling about how religion is a separate magisterium which can neither be proven nor disproven. Back in the old days, people actually believed their religions instead of just believing in them. The biblical archaeologists who went in search of Noah's Ark did not think they were wasting their time. They anticipated they might become famous. Only after failing to find confirming evidence, and finding disconfirming evidence in its place, did religionists execute what William Barclay called the retreat to commitment. I believe because I believe. Back in the old days, there was no concept of religions being a separate magisterium. The Old Testament is a stream of consciousness culture dump. History, law, moral parables, and yes, models of how the universe works, like the universe being created in 6 days, which is a metaphor for the Big Bang, or rabbits chewing their cud, which is a metaphor for... Back in the old days, saying the local religion could not be proven would have gotten you burned at the stake. One of the core beliefs of Orthodox Judaism is that God appeared at Mount Sinai and said with thundering voice, "Yes, it's all true." From a Bayesian perspective, that's some darned unambiguous evidence of a superhumanly powerful entity. Although it doesn't prove that the entity is God, per se, or that the entity is benevolent, it could be alien teenagers. The vast majority of religions in human history, excepting only those invented extremely recently, tell stories of events that would constitute completely unmistakable evidence if they had actually happened. The orthogonality of religion and factual questions is a recent and strictly Western concept. The people who wrote the original scriptures didn't even know the difference. The Roman Empire inherited philosophy from the ancient Greeks, imposed law and order within its provinces, kept bureaucratic records, and enforced religious tolerance. The New Testament, created during the time of the Roman Empire, bears some traces of modernity as a result. You couldn't invent a story about God completely obliterating the city of Rome, a la Sodom and Gomorrah, because the Roman historians would call you on it and you couldn't just stone them. In contrast, the people who invented the Old Testament stories could make up pretty much anything they liked. Early Egyptologists were genuinely shocked to find no trace whatsoever of Hebrew tribes having ever been in Egypt. They weren't expecting to find a record of the 10 plagues, but they expected to find something. As it turned out, they did find something. They found out that during the supposed time of Exodus, Egypt ruled much of Canaan. That's one huge historical error, but if there are no libraries, nobody can call you on it. The Roman Empire did have libraries. Thus, the New Testament doesn't claim big, showy, large-scale geopolitical miracles as the Old Testament routinely did. Instead, the New Testament claims smaller miracles which nonetheless fit into the same framework of evidence. A boy falls down and froths at the mouth. The cause is an unclean spirit. An unclean spirit could reasonably be expected to flee from a true prophet, but not to flee from a charlatan. Jesus casts out the unclean spirit, therefore Jesus is a true prophet and not a charlatan. This is perfectly ordinary Bayesian reasoning if you grant the basic premise that epilepsy is caused by demons, and at the end of an epileptic fit proves the demon fled. Not only did religion use to make claims about factual and scientific matters, religion used to make claims about everything. Religion laid down a code of law before legislative bodies. Religion laid down history before historians and archaeologists. Religion laid down the sexual morals before women's lib. Religion described the forms of government before constitution. And religion answered scientific questions from biological taxonomy to the formation of stars. The modern concept of religion as purely ethical derives from every other's area having been taken over by better institutions. Ethics is what's left. Or rather, people think ethics is what's left. Take a culture dump from 2,500 years ago. Over time, humanity will progress immensely, and pieces of the ancient culture dump will become ever more glaringly obsolete. Ethics has not been immune to human progress. For example, we now frown upon such Bible-approved practices as keeping slaves. Why do people think that ethics is still fair game? Intrinsically, there's nothing small about the ethical problem with slaughtering thousands of innocent firstborn male children to convince an unelected pharaoh to release slaves who logically could have been teleported out of the country. It should be more glaring than the comparatively trivial scientific error of saying that grasshoppers have 4 legs. And yet, if you say the earth is flat, people will look at you like you're crazy. But if you say the Bible is your source of ethics, women will not slap you. Most people's concept of rationality is determined by what they think they can get away with. They think they can get away with endorsing Bible ethics, and so it only requires a manageable effort of self-deception for them to overlook the Bible's moral problems. Everyone has agreed not to notice the elephant in the living room, and this state of affairs can sustain itself for a time. Maybe someday humanity will advance further, and anyone who endorses the Bible as a source of ethics will be treated the same way as Tread Lott endorsing Strom Thurmond's presidential campaign. And then it will be said that religion's true core has always been genealogy or something. The idea that religion is a separate magisterium that cannot be proven or disproven is a big lie. A lie which is repeated over and over again so that people will say it without thinking, yet which is, on critical examination, simply false. It is a wild distortion of how religion happened historically, of how all scriptures present their beliefs, of what children are told to persuade them, and of what the majority of religious people on earth still believe. You have to admire its sheer brazenness. On a pair with Oceania has always been at war with East Asia. The prosecutor whips out the bloody axe, and the defendant, momentarily shocked, thinks quickly and says, But you can't disprove my innocence by mere evidence. It's a separate magisterium. And if that doesn't work, grab a piece of paper and scribble yourself a get-out-of-jail-free card. Endnote 1. The Old Testament doesn't talk about a sense of wonder at the complexity of the universe, perhaps because it was too busy laying down the death penalty for women who wore men's clothing, which was solid and satisfying religious content of that era. Professing and Cheering by Eliezer Yudkowsky. I once attended a panel on the topic, Are Science and Religion Compatible? One of the women on the panel, a pagan, held forth interminably upon how she believed that the earth had been created when a giant primordial cow was born into the primordial abyss, who licked the primordial god into existence, whose descendants killed the primordial giant and used its corpse to create the earth, etc. The tale was long and detailed and more absurd than the earth being supported on the back of a giant turtle, and the speaker clearly knew enough science to know this. I still find myself struggling for words to describe what I saw as this woman spoke. She spoke with pride, self-satisfaction, a deliberate flaunting of herself. The woman went on describing her creation myth for what seemed like forever, but was probably only 5 minutes. That strange pride / satisfaction / flaunting clearly had something to do with her knowing that her beliefs were scientifically outrageous. And it wasn't that she hated science. As a panelist, she professed that religion and science were compatible. She even talked about how it was quite understandable that the Vikings talked about the primordial abyss, given the land in which they lived, explained away her own religion, and yet nonetheless insisted that this was what she believed, said with peculiar satisfaction. I'm not sure that Danielle Dennett's concept of belief in belief stretches to cover this event. It was weirder than that. She didn't recite her creation myth with the fanatical faith of someone who needs to reassure herself. She didn't act like she expected us, the audience, to be convinced, or like she needed our belief to validate her. Dennett, in addition to introducing the idea of belief in belief, has also suggested that much of what is called religious belief should really be studied as religious profession instead. Suppose an alien anthropologist studied a group of English students who all seemingly believed that Wilkie Wilkinson was a retropositional author. The appropriate questions may not be, why do the students believe all this? Why do the students all believe this strange belief? But why do they all write this strange sentence on quizzes? Even if a sentence is essentially meaningless, you can still know when you're supposed to chant the response aloud. I think Dennett may be slightly too cynical in suggesting that religious profession is just saying the belief aloud. Most people are honest enough that if they say a religious statement aloud, they will also feel obligated to say the verbal sentence into their own stream of consciousness. But even the concept of religious profession doesn't seem to cover the pagan woman's claim to believe in the primordial cow. If you had to profess a religious belief to satisfy a priest, or satisfy a co-religionist, heck, to satisfy your own self-image as a religious person, you would have to pretend to believe much more convincingly than this woman was doing. As she recited her tale of the primordial cow, she wasn't even trying to be persuasive on that front, wasn't even trying to convince us that she took her own religion seriously. I think that's the part that so took me aback. I know people who believe they believe ridiculous things, but when they profess them, they'll spend much more effort to convince themselves that they take their belief seriously. It finally occurred to me that this woman wasn't trying to convince, or even convince us, or even convince herself. Her recitation of the creation story wasn't about the creation of the world at all. Rather, by launching into a 5-minute diatribe about the primordial cow, she was cheering for paganism, like holding up a banner at a football game. A banner saying "Go Blues" isn't a statement of fact, or an attempt to persuade. It doesn't have to be convincing. It's a cheer. That strange, flaunting pride, it was like she was marching naked in the gay pride parade. It wasn't just a cheer like marching, but an outrageous cheer like marching naked, believing that she couldn't be arrested or criticized because she was doing it for her pride parade. That's why it mattered to her that what she was saying was beyond ridiculous. If she'd tried to make it sound more plausible, it would have been like putting on clothes. Footnote 1. Of course, there's nothing wrong with actually marching naked in pride parades. This isn't something the truth can destroy. Belief as Attire by Eliezer Yudkowsky. I have so far distinguished between belief as anticipation controller, belief in belief, professing, and cheering. Of these, we might call anticipation controlling beliefs proper beliefs, and the other forms improper beliefs. Proper beliefs can be wrong or irrational, as when someone genuinely anticipates that prayer will cure their sick baby, but the other forms are arguably not belief at all. Yet another improper belief is belief as group identification, as a way of belonging. Robin Hanson uses the excellent metaphor of wearing unusual clothing, a group uniform like a priest's vestments or a Jewish skullcap, and so I will call this belief as attire. In terms of humanly realistic psychology, the Muslims who flew planes into the World Trade Center undoubtedly saw themselves as heroes defending truth, justice, and the Islamic way from hideous alien monsters, a la the movie Independence Day. Only a very inexperienced nerd, the sort of nerd who has no idea how non-nerds see the world, would say this out loud in an Alabama bar. It is not an American thing to say. The American thing to say is that the terrorists hate our freedom, and that flying a plane into a building is a cowardly act. You cannot say the phrases heroic self-sacrifice and suicide bomber in the same sentence, even for the sake of accurately describing how the enemy sees the world. The very concept of the courage and altruism of a suicide bomber is enemy attire. You can tell because the enemy talks about it. The cowardice and sociopathy of a suicide bomber is American attire. There are no quote marks you can use to talk about how the enemy sees the world. It would be like dressing up as a Nazi for Halloween. Belief as attire may help explain how people can be passionate about improper beliefs. Mere belief in belief, or religious professing, would have some trouble creating genuine, deep, powerful emotional effects. Or so I suspect. I confess I'm not an expert here. But my impression is this. People who have stopped anticipating as if their religion is true will go to great lengths to convince themselves they are passionate, and this desperation can be mistaken for passion. But it's not the same fire they had as a child. On the other hand, it is very easy for a human being to genuinely, passionately, gut level belong to a group to cheer for their favorite sports team. Identifying with a tribe is a very strong emotional force. People will die for it. And once you get people to identify with a tribe, the beliefs which are the attire of that tribe will be spoken with the full passion of belonging to that tribe. Footnote 1. This is the foundation on which rests the swindle of Republicans versus Democrats and analogous false dilemmas in other countries, but that's a topic for another time. Pretending to be Wise by Eliezer Yudkowsky. The hottest place in hell is reserved for those who in time of crisis remain neutral. Dante Alighieri, famous hell expert. Actually John F. Kennedy, misquoter. Belief is quantitative, and just as it is possible to make overconfident assertions relative to one's anticipations, it is possible to make underconfident assertions relative to one's anticipations. One can wear the attire of uncertainty or profess an agnosticism that isn't really there. Here I'll single out a special case of improper uncertainty, the display of neutrality or suspended judgment in order to signal maturity, impartiality, or a superior vantage point. An example would be the case of my parents, who respond to theological questions like, why does ancient Egypt, which had good records on many other matters, lack any records of Jews having ever been there, with, oh, when I was your age, I also used to ask that sort of question, but now I've grown out of it. Another example would be the principal, who, faced with two children who were caught fighting on the playground, sternly says, it doesn't matter who started the fight, it only matters who ends it. Of course it matters who started the fight. The principal may not have access to good information about this critical fact, but if so, the principal should say so, not dismiss the importance of who threw the first punch. Let a parent try punching the principal, and we'll see how far it doesn't matter who started it gets in front of a judge. But to adults, it is just inconvenient that children fight, and it matters not at all to their convenience which child started it. It is only convenient that the fight end as rapidly as possible. A similar dynamic, I believe, governs the occasion in international diplomacy where great powers sternly tell smaller groups to stop that fighting right now. It doesn't matter to the great power who started it, who provoked, or who responded disproportionately to provocation, because the great powers in ongoing inconvenience is only a function of the ongoing conflict. Oh, can't Israel and Hamas just get along? This I call pretending to be wise. Of course, there are many ways to try and signal wisdom, but trying to signal wisdom by refusing to make guesses, refusing to sum up evidence, refusing to pass judgment, refusing to take sides, staying above the fray and looking down with a lofty and condescending gaze, which is to say, signaling wisdom by saying and doing nothing, well, that I find particularly pretentious. Paulo Freire said, "Washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral." A playground is a great place to be a bully, and a terrible place to be a victim, if the teachers don't care who started it. And likewise in international politics, a world where the great powers refuse to take sides and only demand immediate truces is a great world for aggressors and a terrible place for the aggressed. But, of course, it is a very convenient world in which to be a great power or a school principal. So part of this behavior can be chalked up to sheer selfishness on the part of the wise. But part of it also has to do with signaling a superior vantage point. After all, what would the other adults think of a principal who actually seemed to be taking sides in a fight between mere children? Why, it would lower the principal's status to a mere participant in the fray. Similarly with a revered elder, who might be a CEO, a prestigious academic, or a founder of a mailing list, whose reputation for fairness depends on their refusal to pass judgment themselves when others are choosing sides. Sides appeal to them for support, but almost always in vain for the wise or revered judges on the condition that they almost never actually judge. Then they would just be another disputant in the fray, no better than any mere arguer. There are cases where it is rational to suspend judgment, where people leap to judgment only because of their biases. As Michael Rooney said, "The error here is similar to one I see all the time in beginning philosophy students. When confronted with reasons to be skeptics, they instead become relativists. That is, when the rational conclusion is to suspend judgment about an issue, all too many people instead conclude that any judgment is as plausible as any other." But then, how can we avoid the related but distinct pseudo-rationalist behavior of signaling your unbiased impartiality by falsely claiming that the current balance of evidence is neutral? Oh, well, of course you have a lot of passionate Darwinists out there, but I think the evidence we have doesn't really enable us to make a definite endorsement of natural selection over intelligent design. On this point, I would advise remembering that neutrality is a definite judgment. It is not staying above anything. It is putting forth the definite and particular position that the balance of evidence in a particular case licenses only one summation, which happens to be neutral. This belief, too, must pay rent in anticipated experiences, and it can be wrong. Propounding neutrality is just as attackable as propounding any particular side. Likewise, with policy questions. If someone says that both pro-life and pro-choice sides have good points and that they should really try to compromise and respect each other more, they are not taking a position above the two standard sides in the abortion debate. They are putting forth a definite judgment, every bit as particular as saying pro-life or pro-choice. It may be useful to initially avoid issues like abortion. It may be useful to initially avoid using issues like abortion or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for your rationality practice, and so build up skill on less emotionally charged topics. But it is not that a rationalist is too mature to talk about politics. It is not that a rationalist is above this foolish fray in which only mere political partisans and youthful enthusiasts would stoop to participate. As Robin Hanson describes it, the ability to have potentially divisive conversations is a limited resource. If you can think of ways to pull the rope sideways, you are justified in expanding your limited resources on relatively less common issues where marginal discussions offers relatively higher marginal payoffs. But then, the responsibilities that you deprioritize are a matter of your limited resources, not a matter of floating high above serene and wise. In sum, there's a difference between passing neutral judgment, declining to invest marginal resources, pretending that either of the above is a mark of deep wisdom, maturity, and a superior vantage point, with the corresponding implication that the original sides occupy lower vantage points that are not importantly different from up there. Footnote 2. Oddly, judges in the actual legal system can repeatedly hand down real verdicts without automatically losing their reputation for impartiality. Maybe because of the understood norm that they have to judge, that it's their job. Or maybe because judges don't have to repeatedly rule on issues that have split the tribe on which they depend for their reverence. Applause Lights by Eliezer Yudkowsky. At the Singularity Summit 2007, one of the speakers called for democratic, multinational development of artificial intelligence. So I stepped up to the microphone and asked, suppose that a group of democratic republics form a consortium to develop AI, and there's a lot of politicking during the process. Some interest groups have unusually large influences, others get shafted. In other words, the result looks just like the product of modern democracies. Alternatively, suppose a group of rebel nerds develops an AI in their basement and instructs the AI to call everyone in the world, dropping cell phones to anyone who doesn't have them, and do whatever the majority says. Which of these do you think is more democratic, and would you feel safe with either? I wanted to find out whether he believed in the pragmatic adequacy of the democratic political process, or if he believed in the moral rightness of voting. But the speaker replied, the first scenario sounds like an editorial in Reason magazine, and the second sounds like a Hollywood movie plot. Confused, I asked, then what kind of democratic process did you have in mind? The speaker replied, something like the Human Genome Project. That was an internationally sponsored research project. I asked, how would different interest groups resolve their conflict in a structure like the Human Genome Project? And the speaker said, I don't know. This exchange puts me in mind of a quote from some dictator or other who was asked if he had any intentions to move his pet state towards democracy. We believe we are already within a democratic system. Some factors are still missing, like the expression of the people's will. The substance of a democracy is the specific mechanism that resolves policy conflicts. If all groups have the same preferred policies, there would be no need for democracy. We would automatically cooperate. The resolution process can be a direct majority vote, or an elected legislature, or even a voter-sensitive behavior of an artificial intelligence. But it has to be something. What does it mean to call for a democratic solution if you don't have a conflict resolution mechanism in mind? I think it means that you have said the word democracy, so the audience is supposed to cheer. It's not so much a propositional statement or belief as the equivalent of the applause light that tells the studio audience when to clap. This case is remarkable only in that I mistook the applause light for a policy suggestion with a subsequent embarrassment for all. Most applause lights are much more blatant and can be detected by a simple reversal test. For example, suppose someone says, we need to balance the risks and opportunities of AI. If you reverse this statement, you get, we shouldn't balance the risks and opportunities of AI. Since the reversal sounds abnormal, the unreversed statement is probably normal, implying it does not convey new information. There are plenty of legitimate reasons for uttering a sentence that would be uninformative in isolation. We need to balance the risks and opportunities of AI. It can introduce a discussion topic. It can emphasize the importance of a specific proposal of balancing. It can criticize an unbalanced proposal. Linking to a normal assertion can convey new information to a bounded rationalist. The link itself may not be obvious. But if no specifics follow, the sentence is probably an applause light. I am tempted to give a talk sometime that consists of nothing but applause lights, and see how long it takes for the audience to start laughing. I'm here to propose to you today that we need to balance the risks and opportunities of advanced artificial intelligence. We should avoid the risks and, insofar as it is possible, realize the opportunities. We should not needlessly confront entirely unnecessary dangers. To achieve these goals, we must plan wisely and rationally. We should not act in fear and panic, or give in to technophobia, but neither should we act in violent enthusiasm. We should respect the interests of all parties with a stake in the singularity. We must try to ensure that the benefits of advanced technologies accrue to as many individuals as possible, rather than being restricted to a few. We must try to avoid as much as possible violent conflict using these technologies, and we must prevent massive destructive capability from falling into the hands of individuals. We should think through these issues before, not after it is too late to do anything about them, and so on. And that covers the sequence called fake beliefs. I will take a short break and then decide whether to continue on with the next sequence as well. See you in a bit. Okay, so the next sequence we'll read is the one called Noticing Confusion, but I don't think we will do all of this today. However, there is no kind of blurb about what the sequence itself is about. So I will read the first essay for focus your uncertainty, just to give a taste of what this might be about. I'm reciting this because of a slight time pressure today, and also to ease myself back into reading. Focus Your Uncertainty by Eliezer Yudkowsky. Will bond yields go up or down or remain the same? If you're a TV pundit and your job is to explain the outcome after the fact, then there's no reason to worry. No matter which of the three possibilities comes true, you'll be able to explain why the outcome perfectly fits your pet market theory. There's no reason to think of these three possibilities as somehow opposed to another, as exclusive, because you will get full marks for punditry no matter which one occurs. But wait, suppose you're a novice TV pundit and you aren't experienced enough to make up plausible explanations on the spot. You need to prepare remarks in advance for tomorrow's broadcast, and you have a limited time to prepare. In this case, it would be helpful to know which outcome will occur, whether bond yields will go up, down, or remain the same, because then you would only need to prepare one set of excuses. Alas, no one can possibly foresee the future. What are you to do? You certainly can't use probabilities. We all know from school that probabilities are little numbers that appear next to a word problem, and there aren't any little numbers here. Worse, you feel uncertain. You don't remember feeling uncertain while you're manipulating the little numbers in word problems. College classes teaching math are nice, clean places, so math can't apply to life situations that aren't nice and clean. You wouldn't want to inappropriately transfer thinking skills from one context to another. Clearly, this is not a matter for probabilities. Nonetheless, you only have 100 minutes to prepare your excuses. You can't spend the entire 100 minutes on up, and also spend all 100 minutes on down, and also spend all 100 minutes on same. You've got to prioritize somehow. If you needed to justify your time expenditure to a review committee, you would have to spend equal time on each possibility. Since there are no little numbers written down, you'd have no documentation to justify spending different amounts of time. You can hear the reviewers now. And why, Mr. Finkeldinger, did you spend exactly 42 minutes on excuse number 3? Why not 41 minutes? Or 43? Admit it, you're not being objective. You're playing subjective favorites. But you realize with a small flash of relief, there's no review committee to scold you. This is good because there's a major Federal Reserve announcement tomorrow, and it seems unlikely that bond prices will remain the same. You don't want to spend 33 precious minutes on an excuse you don't anticipate needing. Your mind keeps drifting to the explanations you use on television of why each event plausibly fits your market theory. But it rapidly becomes clear that plausibility can't help you here. All three events are plausible. Fitability to your pet market theory doesn't tell you how to divide your time. There's an uncrossable gap between your 100 minutes of time, which are conserved, versus your ability to explain how an outcome fits your theory, which is unlimited. And yet, even in your uncertain state of mind, it seems that you anticipate the three events differently, that you expect to need some excuses more than others. And this is the fascinating part. When you think of something that makes it seem more likely that bond prices will go up, then you feel less likely to need an excuse for bond prices going down or remaining the same. It even seems like there's a relation between how much you anticipate each of the three outcomes and how much time you want to spend preparing each excuse. Of course, the relation can't actually be quantified. You have 100 minutes to prepare your speech, but there isn't 100 of anything to divide up in this anticipation business. Although you do work out that if some particular outcome occurs, then your utility function is logarithmic in time spent preparing the excuse. Still, your mind keeps coming back to the idea that anticipation is limited, unlike excusability, but like time to prepare excuses. Maybe anticipation should be treated as a conserved resource, like money. Your first impulse is to try to get more anticipation, but you soon realize that even if you get more anticipation, you won't have any more time to prepare your excuses. No, your only course is to allocate your limited supply of anticipation as best you can. You're pretty sure you weren't taught anything like that in your statistics courses. They didn't tell you what to do when you felt so terribly uncertain. They didn't tell you what to do when there were no little numbers handed to you. Why, even if you tried to use numbers, you might end up using any sort of numbers at all. There's no hint what kind of math to use if you should be using math. Maybe you'd end up using pairs of numbers, right and left numbers, which you'd call DS for Dexter Sinister, or who knows what else. Though you do only have 100 minutes to spend preparing excuses. If only there was an art of focusing your uncertainty, of squeezing as much anticipation as possible into whichever outcome will actually happen. But what could we call an art like that? And what would the rules be like? I hope that gave some taste of what the rest of the Noticing Confusion sequence will be about. And I think that will be all for today. Thank you very much for coming and listening like always, and I will try to see you next week. Bye bye.